Church Bickering. Need I say more? No, I need say some more. Recently, I read something from a former mentor, pastor, and he's also a writer and an author. Probably one of the most influential people in my life, very close friend of Julie and I and of our family. And he has lived in Westcliff, Colorado for 47 years. And he shares his experience over 47 years. And I'm going to read it to you in just a second. But before I do, I want to introduce to you a concept, the unsweet spot, okay? The unsweet spot. So you know what the sweet spot is, right? So if you're playing football and you're a wide receiver and you go out to catch a football being thrown, there's a sweet spot. There's the place where you most want it. Similarly, basketball, there's a sweet spot. When you pass, you pass that ball and it's going to come to the sweet spot. Same thing in baseball. There's a strike zone, but you don't really want the ball that's on the outside of the strike zone. You want the ball right in the center. That's the sweet spot. So we're familiar with the concept of a sweet spot, and relationships have a sweet spot. But the difference between professionals and unprofessionals in the world of sports is that they can handle the unsweet spots. The best receivers, in fact, I don't know how long it's been. Some of you saw, who was the wide receiver, Barry, from Alabama, who got the Heisman this year? Devontae Smith. I don't know how many wide receivers have ever gotten it, but this was quite impressive. His ability to catch the football in difficult situations is what set him apart. Because, see, if it's always in the sweet spot, most people can handle that. But the real professionals are those that when they go to catch a pass, and if you don't know anything about football or even what football is, I'm so sorry. But the unsweet spot is when the ball's not right there and you've got to reach or make a play in order to bring it in. And so relationships have a sweet spot and an unsweet spot. And what ought to be the differences between churches and not churches is that we can handle the unsweet spot. We can go beyond what's easy and what's simple. So now let me read to you what I think is a beautiful, beautiful description of relationships in the sweet spot. Pastor Richard Jones, he writes this. It's a little bit long, but I think it's worth it. He says, I know that 47 years do not qualify Barb and myself as old-timers, but I want to offer a thumbnail sketch of Westcliff as we have known it. No names have been changed to protect the innocent, mainly because none of us, including myself, are innocent. The people mentioned here and many more are all guilty of being a genuine community. Almost a half century ago, there were only about 1,000 people in Custer County. This amounted to little over one person per square mile. Westcliff had one restaurant, 5 churches, no chain stores, no dentist, and no bank. No one seemed to mind that Otto Els had a junkyard behind his Main Street home, or that Myrtle Cody occasionally left her car running in the middle of the road while she ran back into her house for a minute, or that John Comstock's green pickup rarely saw 40 miles per hour on Highway 69. Norma Salamino did not have a car, so the school bus picked Norma up and brought her to town. No one worried that she might sue the school if something happened. When you held up an item, told Bill Falkenberg the price, and then walked out of his hardware store, it never crossed Bill's mind that you might not pay for it later. When children visited Evie's Variety, and I do mean variety store with cash in their pocket, the toy that they wanted always seemed to cost the exact amount of money that they had. The monetary benefit was always in the child's favor. The Henrik kids had a drive-through fishing worm business. You drove around Bill and Anita's driveway, took a box of worms from the big mailbox, and left the money in the Velveeta cheese carton. I'm pretty sure the number of boxes and the amount of money came out pretty close to even. No one ever complained to the state DMV when the license examiner gave Harry Vandenberg a county and daytime only driver's license, even though he couldn't read the eye chart. We all just moved over a little to the right when we saw that gray Jeep coming, and we let Harry pass. Parents did not take their children out of school when Dan Riggs, our game warden, brought deer and elk meat to be used in the school lunch program. The town Christmas tree sat in the middle of Main Street, and if you saw 5 cars in a row, there had probably been a funeral. Jennings Market wasn't open on Sunday, but that did not keep Harold from opening up to get someone a gallon of milk if it was needed. How many conversations did I have with Ben Kettle, Bud Camper, Harvey Rusk, or Jack Giroux sitting in our trucks in the middle of the country road? I never heard anyone honk a horn or cast a dirty look. They just slowed down, waved, and went around us. One December night, 1978, just before Christmas break at school, we had a home basketball game. I was coaching the girls, and our game was over, and when the payphone rang in the hallway, I picked it up. I don't remember who called, but the voice said, "Donnie and Linda's house is on fire. Get everybody out there to help." Without another word or waiting for a reply, he hung up. He gave no last name because he knew that we would know. He gave no directions to the fire because he knew that we would know. It wasn't a question and it wasn't a suggestion. Someone we all knew was in trouble and nothing else needed to be said. I went into the gym, announced the situation, the gym cleared, and we met in the parking lot to carpool to the fire. Our lives became woven together, both unintentionally and on purpose. We saw the same people in Jennings Market, at school plays and ball games, in the post office, on Main Street, or in Susie's Cafe. Sometimes you knew more about people than you really wanted to know. As someone has said, in a small town, the idiosyncrasies of one are slammed against the sensitivities of another. Let me say that one more time. In a small town, the idiosyncrasies of one are slammed against the sensitivities of another. It was a time when no trespassing sign was about as rare as a paved road. We only dialed 4 numbers on the phone, so we knew almost everybody's number. And most of us were on a party line, so we knew almost everybody's business. Over the years, we gathered, branded, butchered, ate, fished, fenced, hunted, hayed, agreed, disagreed, worshiped, laughed, and cried together. We were a community, yes. Times are different now. And I realize that the details of what I have said can't be duplicated. But this is more than just nostalgia. This is a moral story. True community does not come through big event surveys or forums. It is not the product of common interest or conformity of thought. It does not often happen by aiming at it directly. Community comes to us peripherally. Usually it simply overtakes us as we walk the same ground together. Genuine community is shaped organically by the intertwining of lives in very ordinary and daily ways. It is nurtured by shared work and play, shared joy and pain, shared memories and stories, good conversation, and compassion given and received. Community is forged out of the daily encounters and the relational nuances of living life together. In this little out-of-the-way place called Westcliff, is where our first 2 children were born, Barb and I have tasted genuine community. A few of our old friends are still here, but most of them are gone now. I have had the privilege of speaking at the funerals of a fair number of Cokes, Campers, Russ, Colemans, Giroux, Kettles, and Degrees. We have been blessed to share this journey with 4 and in some cases 5 generations, and it is with humility and gratitude toward all of them that we say thank you. This was written in the local Facebook group of Westcliff. The sweet spot. The place where we know and understand each other. The place where the idiosyncrasies of others don't have to bounce difficultly off of the sensitivities of others. Where we can absorb each other's weirdness and differences. And let me say, people are weird. Did y'all hear me? People are weird. We are weird. I'm not weird. You all are weird. I'm a little weird, okay? So, John chapter 13. And we're going to come back to this concept, an unsweet spot. John chapter 13. Let me say this about today's message. I'm going to be real simple. I want to talk about foundations of church bickering, what kind of causes some of our problems. Secondly, I want to talk to you a little bit about this passage that we're about to look at that Jesus gives to his disciples. And then thirdly, I'm just going to offer you 2 suggestions on church etiquette. 2 suggestions on church etiquette. The goal is not to, let me back up. Here's today's point. Giving life to the world, which is what our mission is as God's church, is more than just love and humility to the world. It is love and safety from the world. John chapter 13, verses 34 to 35 says this. Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you also are to love one another." Verse 35, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Now, at the end of today's worship service, we're going to celebrate communion together. We do this once a month. In all of the other Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when we have the Last Supper, the significance of that event is the meaning attached to the elements, that Jesus died, His body is broken, His blood is poured out, and we partake in that. But in John's Gospel, in the same exact setting, the importance that John attaches to that night is that Jesus gives them a new command. Do you remember how long Jesus was with the disciples? Approximately, what? 3 years, somewhere in there, okay? And then He's getting ready to leave them. And He says, here's the thing I need to tell you. When I leave, here's the thing you need to do. You need to love each other, because that's probably going to be the hard thing. All the rest of it, you probably got. This piece, this one's going to be difficult. So what are the foundations of church bickering? Let me give you 3. Gossip, self-promotion. I had self-aggrandizement, but I didn't know how to say that correctly, so self-promotion is what I landed on. And then third-party confrontation. Let me explain all 3 of these. First of all, gossip. The goal here is not to exercise silence regarding the things that surround us. Now, before I go any further, there is always things that are much needed to be discussed. Politics need to be discussed. Things that are happening in our organization and in people's lives need to be discussed. So the goal is not to exercise silence regarding the things that surround us, but to withhold criticism regarding the things that do not concern us. I'll say that again. The goal is not to exercise silence regarding the things that surround us, but to withhold criticism regarding the things that do not concern us. So we could talk about things that do not concern us, but let us be extremely careful with the criticisms we offer with the things that do not concern us. To gossip is to engage in conversation with others about others, which diminishes our respect of the others being discussed. I feel like I have to read everything 5 times today. To gossip is to engage in conversation with others about others, which diminishes our respect for the others being discussed. Secondly, self-promotion. Self-promotion happens when you have a need to assist people in seeing how awesome you are. Self-promotion is when conversation is an opportunity to make me appear bigger, better, and more valuable in your sight. You can know if you do this, in fact, is every time you have a conversation, begin to think to yourself, how much of this conversation did I bring myself into it to try to make myself look bigger? Self-promotion. Luke chapter 14, 7 through 11, we're not going to go there, but this is in a context where Jesus sees all the people trying to get all the seats of honor. And you'll remember what He said to them. He said, don't do that. If in fact anything, if you get invited to like somewhere that's a big deal, choose to sit at the place of least honor. And He tells us why. He says, because then if they say, hey, why don't you come sit in this place of honor, then you're being promoted compared to going, I'm going to sit in this place of honor, and somebody goes, kind of had that saved, like not for you, and that's an embarrassing moment. And Jesus says, don't do that. And so He gives them this principle. He says, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who exalt themselves, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. All right, thirdly, all of these I'll come back to in just a moment. Thirdly, third-party confrontation. I think this is a big one. I think this is a big one, especially when you get involved in community, and especially communities that are organizations, and especially organizations that are churches. Third-party confrontation looks like this. It's when you attempt to get your way in another way that is not respectfully direct. For instance, suppose you think that someone should perform some duty or behavior in their personal life or business life in some manner differently than they in fact do. If the behavior or action is enough of a problem that you feel the need to address it, but instead of having a conversation with that person or that organization, you do one of the following things. This is third-party confrontation. Number 1, you passively unsupport. You display your disapproval through attitude and escape. I want them to know I disapprove. So when I disapprove, here's what I do. I cross my arms, I lean back in my chair, and I don't participate. And I make sure they know that I'm not a fan of what's happening here, whether that's worship or anything else that's happening. We find these passive ways to say, I don't want to say too much that kind of puts me in the camp of like, you need to talk to me, but I want to do enough for you to know that I'm not really happy with you or support what you're doing. That's third-party confrontation. Number 2, you send an email or a letter. There's a joke I ran across that just came to mind. I don't know if you'll think it's funny, but this pastor received this hateful email, and he emailed the person under whose name it was written, and he said, "You need to check your email. It's been hacked. Some idiot just wrote me an email complaining about all this stuff." It was said a lot better than that, but the point was they were assuming you wouldn't do this. I told you wouldn't like it. Number 3, you make a post on Facebook. That's third-party confrontation. That's going, I'm really not happy about something, and here's how I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to make a post to make sure you see it and make sure that you get my point and my feeling without me having to talk to you. You can do this in sermons as well. Number 4, you send someone else to do your dirty work. You need to go talk to the pastor. You know what I'm saying? Third-party confrontation. Yesterday I went highlining at Crowder's Mountain, and part of an incredible community of people who are just genuinely encouraging to each other. Y'all have heard me share a little bit about that group, and I love this community. And so yesterday we had a new person who is a part of highlining community but had not been with our group specifically. And so we're out on Crowder's Mountain. If you don't know what highlining is, it's we take 1-inch webbing and tie it between 2 points, usually about 150 to 200 feet up in the mountains, and we walk across it, okay? It's extremely exciting. And there was this one person who got up on the line, and we, everybody responds to the way you encourage differently. Like somebody's like, "Hey, you got this, you can do it, quit being afraid, do it afraid." And this person looked at me because I was just like, "You got this." And they said, "Hey, I don't want you to take this personally, but that doesn't help me." And I said, "You got this, you can do it." And when they got off the line, they said, "I want you to know I appreciate you not taking that personally. I felt like you could handle me saying that and being honest." And you know what I said? I said, "Thank you. I think that's awesome." Because a lot of people find other ways to communicate other than just simply saying what they feel. We dance around people's emotions, we dance around each other, and we do it in a way that destroys one another. So I'm going to come back to that, but I just want you to get the understanding of third-party confrontation. I wish he wouldn't do that. That would have been a little more difficult, rather than saying, "Hey, I respect you enough to say directly to you. Would you not do that?" Okay, understanding Jesus' command. John chapter 13. I'm going to give you 3 points. The context of this is Jesus is having the Last Supper with his disciples, as I've already shared. And he's preparing them for his departure, and he says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you. And people will know that you are my disciples when you, in fact, love each other." Now, here's the first point. What we do for each other, we do not do because of each other, but because of what God has done for us. If you were to look at this passage and back up just a little bit, if you remember what Jesus did, he gathered his disciples together. And it says, if you go back, if you're following along with me, it says in verse 1, as Jesus was preparing for the Passover, he gathered his disciples. He knew that he was about to depart. And then it says these words. It says, "Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." And then you skip down and we read about what he was about to do. Verse 12, I'm sorry. Let me just kind of go here. Verse 2, "The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon." Let me reread that. "The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given him all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. And then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him." Now to verse 12. "After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and returned to the table, here's what he said to them. 'Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you.'" And then if you were to skip down into the conversation, we get down to verses 34 and 35. He says, "Little children, I am with you only for a little while. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. But I give to you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Same exact thing he said earlier when washing their feet. There he said, as I have served you, serve one another. Here he says, just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. What we do for each other, we do not do because of each other, but because of what God has done for us. When we self-promote, when we gossip and use third-party confrontation, we're governed by fear and we're governed by other people's perceptions of us. When we have to self-promote, the reason we have to do that is because we don't feel already valued. Somehow we have to establish that. But when we know what God has done for us and who we are in Christ, there's no need. I am who I am in Christ. I don't need anybody else in the world to affirm that for me, no matter how much I want them to. You know, we read similar stuff. Luke 13:12-15, Jesus says in that place, he says, in the same way that I have served you, also serve one another. In Luke 15:12-13, he says, true love has one for another if he lays down his life for one. And he says in that context, just as I have done for you, so also do for each other. In Ephesians chapter 41, verses 31-32, Paul says, forgive others just as you have been forgiven. And always this concept, because of what God has done for us in Christ, we do for each other. Can you imagine how crazy it would have been having those disciples? Like, I know the people in our lives are weird, but can you imagine being Jesus, who was perfect? You know what I'm saying? Like, he had it all together. He was the dude. And then he had all these guys around him, these disciples, and he's like, man, I got to love these people. Can you imagine how hard that would have been? And then when he tells us, you do the same for each other, we're like, don't know if I can do that, Jesus. And he's like, Number 2, what we do communicates knowledge to others of what we are. What we do communicates knowledge to others of what we are. That's Jesus' second point. He says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. You know what he doesn't say? If you can recite your articles of faith. Doesn't say that. He doesn't say you had membership covenants that you rehearsed, repeated, and memorized. Doesn't say that. He says people will know who you are by what you do, and what you do is you love one another. When we love each other, we reveal that we are followers of Christ, disciples of his ways, adherents to his example. He loves us when we are obnoxious, weird, wrong, and unthoughtful. Being a follower of Jesus means working to conform our attitudes and behaviors after the fashion of our leader. As churches, we have retreated to doctrine as our primary and often only means of communicating whose disciples we are. Did you hear what I just said? We retreat from loving each other into what we believe to be the hallmarks of who we are. What we believe will not atone for what we do. Thirdly, what people see in us tends to give credence to what people hear from us. Every parent knows this. If you are a hypocrite before your spouse and children, it will be hard for you to communicate truth to their life in a way that they believe. And the same is true to the communities that surrounds us. Who wants to join our community if what they experience here is no different than the disrespect, criticism, and judgment that they receive out there? We do not offer perfection here. We offer genuineness. That's what I love about Pastor Richard's article here was we do not offer perfection, we offer genuine community. We offer community that receives the problems and the weirdness in behalf of Jesus. As a church, we have a hard task in front of us. To hold ourselves to expectations of purity and love. To hold others that join us to that same expectation. In other words, we're not those out there just going, hey, we're community and you just do you, boo. That's not what we're doing. We're kind of like, hey, there are expectations that if we're going to be a part of this community, it looks a certain way. We're going to follow Jesus. And so the hard task is to do at the same time to have room for patience, weirdness, and openness to the uniqueness of others. This task is hard because we are not tossing expectations to the wind. We follow Jesus. All right, 2 tips on church etiquette. There are 2 people groups we get along with that fall into our sweet spot. Those that are just like us and those that we do not yet know are not like us. You hear me? Those that are like us, just like us, and those that we do not yet know are not quite like us. That's the sweet spot. People that are just like us are easy to get along with. They're easy to understand. They fit into our sweet spot of relationship. The unsweet spot is when things are no longer new enough to be adventurous. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know when you meet that new person, you're like, man, this is really awesome. And it's like, you're like this for like 2 years. And then year 2, you start, you start knowing them. And you're like, okay, now it's not so cool, but you don't have enough time in the game to where it's now you understand them. So let me give you this first piece of church etiquette. Stay long enough to be understood, not just to be known. Stay long enough to be understood, not just to be known. There are things we know about a lot of people. There was a guy when I was in Bible college, and he was probably in his 50s at the time I was 18. And I remember me and this fellow, it's not that we didn't get along, but somehow it felt kind of superficial between us. And then I got to understand him. And he stood up one day and he began sharing his story, how he was on a naval ship where someone led him to the Lord and how his life completely changed. And he began sharing this whole piece of his story and his childhood. And as I began to understand him, what happened in my mind is I went, now I can see what makes him make sense. So you ever had those people and you're like, they really annoy me, and then you get to know them, and you're like, now I know what makes them make sense. I know the pieces of their puzzle. And we do this with each other all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like when you married your spouse, and you were like, this person is perfect. And then a year goes by, and you're like, maybe not so much. And then lots of time goes by, and you begin to understand that person. Stay long enough to be understood, not just to be known. To know somebody is to simply gather some information about them, which we may or may not agree with. But to understand them is to get them, to know what makes them tick and make sense. Some people just aren't talkers. They're not grumpy. It's just not their personality. You got to know people long enough to understand that. Here's the second tip. Seek to understand, not just to be understood. Seek to understand, not just to be understood. When we go into a community, let me tell you where my unsweet spot is. Year 3. In anything, year 3 is, I think it's probably different for anybody. For me, I know it's year 3. Because year 3 is not new enough to be a new adventure, but it's not old enough to be home. You know what I'm saying? Like that comfortable spot. So year 3 is like my unsweet spot. Like if you survive that in a relationship or in a place or an organization, that's where you need to be. That's my unsweet spot. So seek to understand, not just to be understood. When we come into a place, the biggest thing I think we often fear in a relationship is if they could really see in me, if I say too much, people are going to reject me. And then if people do find out about me, the one thing we want to make sure we do is explain to them why that is the case with me. Let me justify myself before that person. I want them to understand me. And I'm saying that's okay. The only thing is, seek to understand, not just to be understood. Because see, if that's only one way, if you look at all the weirdness around you and you go, hey, I want to always explain myself so that people can understand why I'm this way, understand they're thinking the exact same thing. And that probably if they knew your whole story, they would understand the pieces that make you tick. Also, if you understood their story, you would understand the pieces that make them tick. Because see, my story is not the only story here. It's not your story that's all a part of my story. We're each a part of each other's story. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We are in a crazy time. Not just coming out of 2020, but even as a church. I don't know how much, if we're in a sweet spot, unsweet spot, I'm not real sure. I think as we kind of mix what used to be, where we have some of us that have long history here, and then we have some of us where this is brand new, and we have some that go, I've been here for this long in my life, and this was comfortable, and now this is a lot of change. This is not comfortable. And then we've got those who come in, and they're new, and they're going, this is really cool and new. And I don't know how all this fits together, but I think that as we move forward, we have to figure out how to do genuine community. We can't wait to go, man, we finally got 40 years invested in each other. We're in the sweet spot. Because then when that happens, guess what begins to happen? You begin to build walls up and you go, I really don't want anybody to mess with this sweet spot. So what do we do? We're about to celebrate communion. I'm going to bless the elements. When Paul was relating to the Corinthian church, he said, when Jesus was with his disciples, he took the bread and he broke it. And he said, this is my body, as often as you eat of it, do so in remembrance of me. And then he took the cup in the same way after he had given thanks. He gave some to his disciples, saying, this is the blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you for the forgiveness of your sins. An incredibly important event that we celebrate together. But when we celebrate it, I think of the way Pastor Richard wrote those words where he over and over said, we did all these things in community. Whatever we do here, the battles we face, the weirdness that we are, together we do it. Together we fight. Do we mess up? Yes, we do. But we do it together. Are we honest and have to keep working on our relationship skills? Yes, we do. But we do it together. So today when you partake, as I present to you the elements, you can come and you may kneel as you partake. You may come and kneel at the altars. You may go back to your seat. You may stand. Doesn't matter how you partake. When you do this, this is not just about you and Jesus. It is about you and Jesus, but it is not just about you and Jesus. The Last Supper also represents the last command. When I'm gone, serve one another, love one another,